Thank you very much. My name is Chris Legg. I'm from the Australian Treasury, and I've been privileged to be asked to chair this session. I have to say that the substance of the discussion will come from my speakers. My job is just to act as a sort of traffic cop and timing, basically. I'd like, first of all, to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land on which we meet and pay my respects to any elders, past and present. I'd also then like to introduce our speakers. This session is the second session, as I understand it, in the conference we're having, and a focus on the economic outlook, which I think is a nice compliment. I understand the first session was very much about the politics. Clearly, these things in all countries are deeply interwoven. And so we're lucky to have two speakers today and then a commentator, a discussant, who know a lot about these issues. And I've apologised to Martin already. I'm going to struggle with how many vowels are in his surname, but he tells me this is common and even Indonesian struggle. But we have Dr. Martin Siyaranamual. Pretty good? Pretty good. Good. From the University of Padjadjaran, who has an extensive experience in environmental valuation, in experimental economics. I'm always interested as a Treasury officer in what experimental economics is. And the relationship with social networks, and has done research on the effect of social interaction in public good provision. We also have Dr. Paul Burke from the ANU's Crawford Centre. Crawford School has extensive experience in energy, environment, transport, Asia-Pacific development as a researcher, but also as a practitioner in development in Tonga and elsewhere, I noticed. Martin and Paul are going to together speak for about 40 minutes. My job is to keep them to that. So Paul's under instruction not to eat into Martin's term and then make me be tough on Martin. And then we have a discussant, Vivi Alatas, the World Bank's lead economist for poverty in Indonesia, who will speak for about 10, 15 minutes thereafter. Has an extensive background in these issues, runs a significant team that works on these issues, published extensively. I will be fairly tough. I've been told by the organisers to be ruthless. That was the word that was used. So I'll be giving them heads up when they're 5 minutes and then 1 minute to go. So, Paul first. We're in your hands, Paul.
Well, thank you very much, Chris, and good morning, everyone. It's a privilege to be here today to present the Economic Update 2019 with Martin Siyaranamual. Let me get straight into our topic on the economics. Our talk will cover three main themes. The first theme is a macroeconomic update. Indonesia's economy is maintaining the world's most stable economic growth rate at a time of US-China trade frictions and also slowing economic growth in the region. It has, however, been a difficult first half year of 2019 for Indonesia's export sector, with exports down quite substantially. Inflation is within the target range and interest rates in Indonesia are heading lower. We will also provide focus to a big new topic that has come up in Indonesia over recent months, which is the President's proposal to move Indonesia's capital city from Jakarta to East Kalimantan. We will argue the economic case that this is an inadvisable idea for two key reasons. The first is the substantial cost of making the move, and the second is the lack of desirability of having a remote capital city for a major nation. Number three, handing over to Martin, will be a focus on the President's No One Left Behind agenda. Indonesia, quite amazingly, is getting very close to 100% electrification of households, up very quickly over the last decade. Large challenges, however, remain in terms of broad access to modern energy. Indonesia has also been taking steps towards a broader social safety net with targeting of key marginalised groups. However, low revenue collections form a constraint to the ability of Indonesia to meet inclusive objectives. First of all, having a look at economic growth. This graph will show the economic growth rates of India and China and also Indonesia, the region's three big giants in terms of population. Indonesia's economic growth rate has been amazingly stable over recent times, and as of the June quarter was averaging 5% per annum. In contrast, India and China have slowing economic growth rates, with India's in particular slowing quite rapidly over the last 12 months. Globally, world economic growth is expected to be slower this year compared to last year, with the IMF expecting around 3.2% expansion this year in real terms. Indonesia's amazing growth stability is not just to be seen over recent quarters. Actually, Indonesia is the world's #1 most stable economy since 2002. So what we've done here is we got together data on the annual GDP growth rates of more than 200 countries in the world. Since 2002 until 2018, we looked at the standard deviation of the growth rate, which is a measure of the variability. Indonesia is the world's #1 in terms of having a stable economic growth rate. And perhaps interestingly, Australia is #2. If we were standing in, if we were in 1998 or 1999, thinking about Indonesia's economy at that time during the Asian financial crisis, it would have been very difficult to foresee that Indonesia would quickly go on to having the world's most stable economic growth rate over such an extended period. What are the reasons for this growth stability in Indonesia? One is that there is smaller trade exposure for Indonesia compared to other economies. The trade to GDP ratio is relatively lower, which insulates Indonesia from some international shocks. Indonesia's economy is also more diversified than many economies. Even within the commodity bundle, Indonesia is diversified between palm oil, coal, minerals, and also oil and gas. Indonesia also has a record of relative political stability, certainly compared to Thailand, for example, which has had political crises and coups. Indonesia also has had a generally good record in macroeconomic management and in crisis risk mitigation. All else equal, why is having a more stable economic growth rate kind of a good thing? One point in the political realm is that a more stable economic growth rate reduces the chance of a short-term political crisis associated with a slowdown in the economy. To date, Indonesia's economic growth has been very stable, but how about the future? The global economy is currently experiencing increasing trade frictions associated with the US-China trade war. External conditions tend to place downward momentum on Indonesia's economic growth. Like other countries in the region, including Malaysia, South Korea, and Australia, Indonesia has recently moved to a more accommodative monetary policy stance, with 2 interest rate cuts, one in July and one in August, bringing the key interest rate down from 6% to 5.5%, with Bank Indonesia citing the US trade frictions as one of the key motivations for this reform, for this reduction in interest rate. It has been a difficult half year for Indonesia's exports. In terms of nominal US dollars, Indonesia's export value was down by almost 9% in the first half of 2019 relative to the first half of 2018. So that's a larger fall than experienced by China or by OECD countries. And India has had a slight increase in the value of its exports over the same period. The reason for the large reduction in Indonesia's exports is largely on the commodity side. And part of it is short-term factors. Indonesia's key commodities had a very difficult first half of the year, with the value of exports of oil and gas falling by 30% and of metal ores falling by almost 50%. A key reason for this, the key reason, is a large reduction in output of copper from the Freeport-McMoran-Grasberg mine, and that's a temporary factor as that mine moves from open pit to underground extraction. Another temporary factor is one of the key LNG facilities also was shut for maintenance for several weeks, so that has contributed to the reduction in exports of natural gas. Palm oil has also had a difficult half year in terms of the price of palm oil, and the price of some of the other key export commodities has also fallen this year relative to the levels that were seen in 2018 and earlier. Indonesia's inflation target is from 2.5 to 4.5%, and Indonesia has remained within that inflation target range. Inflation is lower than it was several years ago in Indonesia, as in other key countries as well. As of August 2019, the data just out, the annual inflation rate is 3.5%. Looking within the inflation data, one of the interesting points is what has been happening with energy prices. Energy prices on average have deflated over the last 12 months. In Indonesia, key energy products for consumers have administered prices and the government has kept them stable. And for electricity consumers, a large group of electricity consumers had a small price cut during this year. All things considered, that led to a very small reduction on average in energy prices for Indonesian consumers. This, however, points to, hey, this might be a very good moment to take another step in terms of reducing Indonesia's energy subsidies. Indonesia has still large subsidies for electricity use, for fuel use, and rising subsidies for liquefied petroleum gas use. President Joko Widodo will be sworn in for his second term in October, and it will be his final term, and we foresee that there will not be many breaks on his ambition, and he has set out a very ambitious agenda with many policy priorities here. I'll just go through this list, and then we're going to focus in particular on the first and the last items on the list. The President has announced a No One Left Behind agenda, which is focusing on social inclusion. Other priorities include cutting the corporate income tax rate, boosting human capital, reducing restrictions on foreign investors, and inefficiencies in the bureaucracy, maintaining inflation, keeping inflation under control, maintaining it within the target range, boosting tax collections, potential reforms to the labour law, although exactly what the reforms would involve is not yet clear, continued investment in infrastructure, and as of less than 2 weeks after the election, a new announced priority of a new capital city for Indonesia. The plan to move Indonesia's capital city. Things have moved quite quickly in terms of this plan, taking many by surprise. On the 29th of April, the President announced his interest in a shift of capital with a post on Instagram. On the 16th of August, in his State of the Nation address to the House of Representatives, the President encouraged broad support for the idea of moving the capital city to a location in Kalimantan. On the 28th of August, the President announced that a location has been chosen in East Kalimantan, with moving announced to be from 2024, although we believe that long delays should be expected in terms of that date. The proposed location is 1,300 kilometres away from Jakarta, across the Java Sea. So this would be a very unique thing in terms of political history to have, in modern times, to have a move which is so far and across an ocean of a capital city of a major country. What are the official motivations for moving the capital city? There are three broad motivations. The first one is to help decentralise Indonesia's political and economic activities away from Jakarta and also Java. The second is to try to take some of the pressure off Jakarta, a megacity that is affected by some real issues, including traffic congestion, air pollution, land subsidence, and flooding. The third one is to ensure that Indonesia has a safe and livable capital city for the long term, noting that Jakarta is prone to risks in terms of earthquakes and also in terms of sea level rise. What are the costs of moving the capital city? The government has reported that an investment requirement of 466 trillion rupiah would be needed for moving the capital, which is around US $33 billion. This number includes investment requirements of the government and also SOEs and the private sector. This number has got around a lot, but we believe it is a very large underestimate of the full investment requirement for a new capital city for Indonesia. The number here does not include several parts of key investments that would be required, for example, embassies moving and some other examples as well. An important point is that the costs of moving capital city are not just upfront, they would also be ongoing. Think of those flights between Jakarta and East Kalimantan that public servants and many others would frequently be making if the city were to be moved, the capital were to be moved. It is important to consider the opportunity cost of doing this. This investment would displace resources from other key priorities, and Indonesia does have a very long list of priorities for investment. There would be substantial environmental and also potentially social implications of the move to East Kalimantan, noting that the chosen site is forested and its surrounds also. One point of interest is potential Dutch disease effects in the new site, in the new capital. Dutch disease means as investment resources flow into that new location, the prices of non-tradables would be bid up, and the cost of living in the new capital might actually be quite high. Already we are seeing land prices being bid up in the local area. Interesting new economic research by Campante and others concludes that countries that have more remote capital cities actually have weaker governance performance. So they conclude, for example, looking around at examples in Brazil and elsewhere, that a more remote capital city, in terms of governance, is not a desirable thing. The opportunity cost, as economists, is the point that rings really large to us, and the other points here are very important also. If the Indonesian government does decide to move the capital city, and it does need to get through the House of Representatives first, then a legacy for the president of moving the capital city might well come at the cost of a legacy of making major improvements in human capital, health, education, and other outcomes in Indonesia. In our research, we have looked across at other examples of capital city moves, and we've drawn some lessons. One picture here is a picture from Naypyidaw in Myanmar, which is only 300 kilometres away from Yangon, so it's much closer physically to Yangon. Also, we looked at some other examples. South Korea is moving key administrative functions to Sejong City, 120 kilometres south of Seoul. Malaysia has moved the centre of government to Putrajaya, just a little more than 20 kilometres from Kuala Lumpur. And other examples as well. It's quite a growing trend. Some lessons from other capital city moves. Number one is it's not easy. It would take decades before it could be called a success, most likely. Really, it is a century-long project. Another is that many public servants and others will not make the move and will commute perhaps once a week, perhaps once a month between Jakarta and a new location for the capital. There are many prerequisites for a vibrant capital city, and they are not easily met. A capital of a country like Indonesia needs to have, for example, a top-class university, top-class cultural institutions, and so on. It takes a long time, and it would take a large investment, for those things to be realised, those prerequisites. There is a large potential for regret in making a move like this, because this is a sunk cost investment and is not a flexible one. And because it will take years and years, it will be Jokowi's successors who will be the ones who really will be moving in and taking the project on in its key phases. A key lesson is if moving closer is better, and the Malaysian example shows that. If it's closer, then the costs are much lower and the commute time also is much shorter. In recent history, it is unprecedented to move a major capital to another island. Jakarta is not going anywhere. It will still be there. It is Indonesia's major city and it will remain so for many years to come. Either way, move the capital or not, investments in Jakarta are really needed. Greater Jakarta has a population of more than 30 million people and will remain the key city of Indonesia for many decades to come. Jakarta is by far the most connected city to most Indonesians. There are many opportunities to address Jakarta's serious problems. And for many of those problems, major efforts have yet to be taken. Investments and policies are needed and are possible, including for issues such as groundwater management and air pollution. And the picture here of the MRT that was opened in Jakarta this year displays that some progress is being made. The first line of the MRT was opened in March 2019, and construction on the second line has already commenced. There are big expenditure plans for Jakarta. The central government has announced a US $40 billion urban regeneration project for Jakarta to improve the life of Jakartans and to protect Jakarta against some key risks. There is also a proposal for an outer sea dike for Jakarta. This is a very expensive project on its own and would need to be subject to environmental, social and economic analyses of its own. An important point is that there are examples of mega cities that are their national capital. For example, Tokyo and London. These two cities have both over the years largely overcome key environmental challenges. I just would like to look into one of those topics in terms of Jakarta's list of challenges, and that is air pollution. This topic has risen in prominence this year as a result of very high air pollution readings in Jakarta, and also a group of citizens taking the president and the governor of Jakarta and also the government of Indonesia to court, suing them over their lack of action in terms of addressing air pollution. On this graph, I will be showing the annual data for Jakarta's air quality index, which is a measure that many people check on a very frequent basis on their phones. On this scale, 50 is the maximum for good air quality rating. And 101 is the cutoff for unhealthy for sensitive groups. And 150 is another cutoff called unhealthy. On the graph, I'll be showing the monthly average of Jakarta's air pollution readings in terms of the air quality index. In the middle of this year, Jakarta had many days of unhealthy air, causing serious health costs and costs to the economy as well. Comparing Jakarta to other cities around the world, Jakarta, the air quality is better than Delhi. Okay, so Jakarta is not the world's worst polluted city. Delhi, for example, has a higher pollution rating. Bangkok, on the other hand, has reduced its air pollution issues quite a lot over recent years and is performing much better than Jakarta. Sydney is on 31 on this scale, and Canberra's is so low they don't provide the data. Air pollution comes at a serious cost for people living in Jakarta. Recent research is out showing that the life expectancy of Jakartans is lower by around 2.3 years as a result of only the PM 2.5 air pollution in Jakarta. That's a serious cost. The good news is there are some opportunities for addressing this issue, opportunities in bringing in more clean energy, electric vehicles, and many other policies and technologies that could be brought into play. Now hand over to Martin for the look at No One Left Behind.
Thank you, Paul. Good morning, everyone. This is an honor for me actually to present our research in front of all of you. And then for your information, this is also my first time visiting Australia, and then Canberra is my first city. So according to Paul, Canberra is the first city, and then Sydney and Melbourne will be the second and the third. Well, you can do. Anyways, let's move on to our presentation. As Paul already mentioned, we have in our presentation we will divide it into 3 parts, and then the last part is No One Left Behind agenda in Indonesia. President Jokowi, for the first time, used the phrase "No one left behind" when he was attending ASEAN Leaders Gathering in October last year, and then the main message of No One Left Behind is that priority is given. Priority in economic development is given to be inclusive of all. Although No One Left Behind agenda consists of so many different aspects, in our talks today, we only cover 4 aspects. The first one is modern energy for all. The second one, persons with disabilities. The third one is elderly, and then the last one, the unemployed one. We acknowledge that there are other groups that often marginalized. However, as I will explain it later, there is an ongoing active policy intervention from the current government. Okay, let's move on to the first topic, which is the residential electricity access. Indonesia has made impressive progress in broadening residential electricity access. As June 2019, there are 98.8% households already have electricity in their homes. And then the lowest electrification ratio could be found in East Nusa Tenggara with 72%. However, this impressive progress hides much of the story. One particular story is many households, especially households located outside Java, they have small usage quantities. For example, in West Sulawesi, the average consumption of electricity is only 1/10 of consumption found in Jakarta. And then beside that, the electricity outage remains an issue in Indonesia. In 2017, PLN customer located in South Sulawesi, Jambi, and Bengkulu province, on average, each year, they experience 42 times electricity outage, which is huge. And then if you bring that number to Java or Bali, the country will explode. The other issue is off-grid access to electricity in some remote areas typically consists only a small solar panel and a battery pack. Well, having a small solar panel and a battery pack is better than nothing. However, these two are not enough to power modern life. So there is still high inequality in modern life between Java and outside Java, Java and Bali and outside. With near universal household electrification close to being achieved, we believe that this is a good time for government of Indonesia, to go go beyond electrification ratio agenda. Government could focus their energy to improving the quality and the quantity of available electricity. And then they also can put a much more ambitious target. Well, progress has been made also in broadening clean cooking access. However, it is not as impressive as residential electricity access. By this year, Indonesia household reliance on biomass and kerosene have declined to only 30%. Compare in 2000, there are 88 Indonesians relied on non-clean cooking fuels. And then we believe that this issue is important because using non-clean cooking fuels can cause so many health issues, so many health problems. And then one particular key contributor of this progress was because of the National Kerosene to LPG Conversion Program launched in 2017. And then the 3-kilogram melon canister is the result of the 2007 program. However, there is not much emphasis on broadening the clean cooking access in Indonesia currently. Although we believe that government of Indonesia can open so much opportunities if they can focus more on clean cooking stove, increase use electricity for cooking, and better targeting of programs to the needy. Focusing on the last part, the targeting of the LPG subsidy, the reason why this targeting becoming an issue because the 3 kilo in Indonesia for Indonesian household, there are only two options for using the LPG. Either you are using the 12 kilogram or the 3 kilograms. For household that only consists pensioners, like my home back in Jakarta, the 3 kilogram option is much better than the 12 kilogram option because, well, my parents no longer have a muscle. The muscle man already out of the home. So the 3 kilogram is much better. My mother said like that. Anyways, so moving to the now focusing on the disadvantaged group. Another considerable progress in Indonesia is the falling of the poverty rate to 9.4% as of March 2019. However, around 1/5 of Indonesians remains vulnerable to falling back to poverty. And then persons with disabilities and the elderly are much more likely to be poor. And then related to the poverty issue, the current data set available to calculate the poverty rate, the National Socioeconomic Survey or SUSENAS, it doesn't have enough information regarding the consumption pattern of persons with disabilities. And then because of that, it is most likely the poverty rate, if we put it into the for person with disabilities, it will be heavily underestimated. Looking at the disability condition in Indonesia, according to 2015 Intercensus Population Survey, or SUPAS in Bahasa Indonesia, counts that about 9% of Indonesians aged 2 and above, they have moderate and severe disability. And then looking at this graph, just information, if you add the all 5 columns, you will get 100% of persons with disabilities in Indonesia. Looking at this graph, the disability prevalence is particularly high among those who age 60 and above. And then as we know, having disability is related with so many different issues, ranging from inferior health outcomes to lower labor participation. And then there is from those issues, there is one particular issue that we want to highlight. Then issue is relatively being neglected. Having a disabled member of the family can actually reduce the labor market participation for the non-disabled member of the family. So in other words, the healthy member should taking care of the disabled member. There are several aspects that needs to be done for disability inclusive development. And then, first and foremost, reducing stigmas, including self-stigma. By acknowledging that persons with disabilities can also contribute to maximize a nation's potential, could open so many opportunities for Indonesia. For example, now person with disability is no longer an invisible labor force. Second, increasing the availability of disability-friendly infrastructure and services. Facilities like hearing aids or sign language translators must be made, could be made available in the development forums and discussion. Better data on disabilities. By having high quality data, government of Indonesia can actually monitor and evaluate in many key areas. Prioritization by ministry across sectors, better implementation of Law Number 8, 2016. In Law Number 8, 2016, there is one article, Article 53, and then this article mandate that at least 2% of the total employee of public sector entity and 1% of each private sector entity should be persons with disability. Currently, there is no sanction for employers who do not abide by this law. Moving forward to the second group, which is the elderly group. Indonesia's population is aging. United Nations project that in year 2100, around 27% of Indonesia's population will be age 65 and above. Unfortunately, Indonesia is not well prepared for an aging population. Why? Only a small fraction of elderly people who have access to pension insurance. And then those who have access to pension insurance, they must be permanent workers. And then majority of them are government employees, public sector employees. And then what is the implication of that? The implication of that is, of people aged 65 and above, around 6 million, or about 40%, are still working mostly in agriculture. Regarding to person with disability and the elderly, there is a progress has been made. The most noticeable progress is the conditional cash transfer, Indonesia's conditional cash transfer or Program Keluarga Harapan, PKH, has been through a major reform. In 2019, for the first time, additional benefits were included for the elderly and persons with disabilities, with the total benefit is about 2.4 million per year, and then targeted to 10 million low-income families. So it's not only about poor-income families, but also some of the vulnerable families. And then the total budget is about 2.2% of the Indonesia GDP. And then we believe in the future, PKH is capable for being expanded to target more of the vulnerable. Moving to the last group, the unemployment rate. Currently, the Indonesia's unemployment rate is by February 2019 is 5.1%. However, Indonesia still faces a large challenge in generating an adequate quantity of decent jobs. Decent jobs is a permanent jobs. And then looking at the current number, only 9% of the total employed in 2018, of the total employed individuals have a permanent workers. Others are a contract workers or a fixed-term contract workers or informal workers. In part, it's due to stringent employment regulation, complex hiring rules, high severance pay, and complex minimum wage. And then in regard with this issue, President Jokowi has planned a potential reform to manpower, even though the detail is still unclear yet. Besides promising to ease the labor regulation, Jokowi also has announced the commencement of pre-employment cards in 2020, program Kartu Prakerja. The main objective of this program is to fund a vocational training opportunities for the unemployed. And then the initial target is 2 million unemployed individuals. It is worth noting that this program is not focusing on providing a new cash transfer. No, there is no cash transfer for this program. This program initially, currently, only focusing providing vocational training. And it is for 2 million unemployed. 2 million unemployed meaning, looking at the 2019 data set, around 30% of the unemployed people. So the current one is 6.5 unemployed individuals in Indonesia. Okay. Whether or not Jokowi can deliver what he promised in creating more inclusive nation, partially will depend on Indonesia's fiscal capacity. And then if you look at the projection of the 2020 budget, non-tax revenue is still really low. And then the overall revenue collection grow more slowly than inflation. And then even though the social assistance spending is growing, it still is already growing, but it still remains low. It's only 0.6% of GDP. Limited fiscal resources together with the spending items, with the, for example, with the moving the capital city, can hurt the no one left behind agenda. In summary, Indonesia's journey towards more inclusive nation is still a long way to go. And then there are important aspects needed to realize for this inclusive nation can be materialized. Key for job creation is a strong economy with a few restrictions on contracting employees. The conditional cash transfer program in Indonesia could be a building block for a better social protection system in Indonesia. Indonesia's retirement pension system could be better. It needs a reform that, taking into account the informal workers. Targeted training using the pre-employment cards is an interesting experience, and then it could be a new stepping stone for a better unemployment safety net. Great potential to boost opportunities for persons with disabilities. And then for the case of energy, beyond electrification agenda is needed, and access for a better cooking technology is also need to be emphasized. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. I now call on Vivi to be the discussant. If I could ask Vivi to limit your comments to about 10 minutes so that we have enough time for questions and answers afterwards.
I also agree with all what they said, including especially on the potential regret of moving the capital. So I hope Hal, Blaine, and Budi will share their paper with their friends in the government. But what I would like to talk in my 10 minutes talk is actually elaborate one of the main messages that Paul and Martin had emphasized, leaving no one behind. They already stressed the importance of addressing the elderly and the disabled issues. What I would like to complement is actually really looking at investigating further, did the poverty efforts that the government did indeed leave no one behind? The message of leaving no one behind is not only emphasized by our Jokowi, but also more than 50 years ago by Mahatma Gandhi. Recall the face of the poorest and weakest person you have seen and ask if the step you contemplate is going to be any use to them. SDG is also the same thing. Ensure no one left behind. When policymaker talks about poverty, the most mentioned statistics is Hagan index, or the so-called poverty rate, the number of population, the proportion of the population living below the poverty line. But talking only about poverty Hagan neglect the underlying stories behind. Certain decrease in poverty can come from many underlying stories. It could happen like the same poverty reductions, lifting only those around the poverty line, while another, the same one, could actually lift everyone, including lifting the boats for everyone, including the bottom of the population, rising the floor. If we look at the whole world, Martin Ravalion work showed that even though the poverty in the whole world has decreased quite rapidly, the consumption of the floor population was stagnant. Yes, the poorest have been left behind. What about Indonesia? Paul and Martin already indicated poverty and inequality rates have declined in the last decades. Poverty used to be 23.5% at the peak of the financial crisis. Now it's 1 digit. Similarly, inequality had gradually decreased. But do we leave no one behind? And comparing to the rest of the world, Indonesia has made somewhat more progress in raising the floor. It was not stagnant, but still a long way to go, especially if we compare with the trend of the overall mean consumption for Indonesia, comparing it with the consumption floor. What happened? Who are these households in the very bottom of the distribution? How similar or different their profile compared to the rest of the poor? They tend to live in rural area. 33%, only 32% live in urban areas. They tend to be unemployed more, like higher unemployment, 7.4%. Having lower probability of being wage worker, working in financial or construction sectors. Higher probability of being unpaid family workers, 22%. Higher probability of working in agriculture. And I can dig further on like the profile of this bottom, the very poorest of the population. But what I would like to talk in my remaining 5 minutes is actually what government did so far in addressing poverty. What needs to be done more? Indonesia fiscal reform have enabled government to spend more on various poverty programs such as Raskin, PKH, the Conditional Cash Transfer Program, health and education. Indonesia reduced mistargeted energy subsidies from 3.7% of GDP to 0.7%. Increased social assistance, increased infrastructure, increased spending on health. But what are the impact on poverty? To understand the impact on poverty, we need to know the size of the benefit that goes to the poor and the proportions of the poor who receive the benefits. So it depends on the size of the budget, but also on the targeting performance, the so-called exclusion error and inclusion error. Overall, Indonesia's energy subsidy has decreased from 3.7% to 0.7% GDP in 2017. The targeting performance has been improved, but energy subsidies were salient for the poor. In 2012, it's around 8%. By 2017, for the poorest decile, it's become 4%. So without effective reallocation, the reduction could have had negative impact. But fortunately, Indonesia did reallocate. Number of households in the bottom of the population, in the bottom 40%, that receive any form of social assistance increased from 5.3 million to 17.3 million households. The size of the benefits also increased by twofold. The targeting performance in terms of the share of social assistance benefit received by the bottom 40 increased from 53% to 61%. But it means there are still 40% of the share of the benefit that goes to the upper level of the distribution. Yes, targeting has been improved, but we need more improvement to improve targeting to ensure that it has a better impact on poverty. PKH, as Martin already said, was the main pillar of overall social assistance. Started with only 400,000 households, now it becomes 10 million households. The targeting performance is much better than overall social assistance. You have much smaller inclusion error, and also in terms of the size of the benefit increased by 5 times. But the total amount of the poorest household that receive PKH is only 2 million, where the eligible one is around 4 million. There are still a lot of room in addressing the exclusion error. The other program, like the program Indonesia Pintar, the scholarship, complementing it, we have also an increase on the size, only twofold. The targeting performance slightly better, but not as good as PKH. We have an issues of inclusion error here. We also have the issues of exclusion error, because only 2 million out of around 3 million of the eligible household receiving it. So did Indonesia spend enough on social assistance? And in comparison with other countries, Indonesia's spending on social assistance is very low, only 0.8%, compared to South Africa, which is 3.5%. What about health and education? There is an improvement in targeting, but what we can see is actually remains not as generous and progressive as some other countries. Indonesia is the last one at the left part, which is very small compared to other countries in terms of the size and also in terms of progressivity. So in conclusion, Indonesia still spends very little on some of the most effective inequality reducing programs. Indonesia needs to improve its targeting. Education spending is progressive, but it is more progressive and also more generous in other countries. Health has become more pro-poor, but it is not very generous. So Indonesia could do more to ensure no one left behind. Thank you.
Well, I'd like to thank the speakers for making my job easy, because they've done a good job of sticking to time. I do want to ensure that we have scope for questions and answers, and we're being live streamed on Facebook, so there may be questions from Facebook, but the floor is open. I believe there are microphones floating around the place, so there's the first question here. Yep. Here?
Hi, I'm Hal Hill from ANU. 3 really good presentations, thank you. A question mainly to Vivi. Thanks, Vivi, that's terrific. The question of targeting, given the budget is so small and given Indonesia such a vast archipelago, how is targeting going to be improved? This debate about whether it should be top-down, the large database, and then you can sort of work off that, or should it be bottom-up, that is funding mainly coming through the DESAs, now that also we have done a DESA? How's it going to be improved? As you noted, it's getting better, but it must be a huge job to do it well. Thank you. I guess also to Martin, same question, but it's Vivi in particular. Thank you.
I'll take a couple of questions and we'll sort of people can think about the answers. So I think there's a Facebook question. Here? Not here? Excuse me, with the mic? Facebook question.
Go Facebook. Azhari Cahyo Edi in Yogyakarta asked why Jokowi is taking the riskier development project of moving the capital instead of just choosing more business as usual projects like infrastructure. Being popular can be achieved through easier choices. Why choose the riskier project with uncertain political benefits but certain political risks? Rusan follows up with whether the move will mean that budget will be disallocated from human capital spending.
One more question, and then we'll get the gentleman in the middle. Behind.
Thank you. My name is Ronnie Susanto, and I'm an electorate officer to the state member for Lismore, Channel 7. I have a question for Martin. You did mention about people with disability in Indonesia and also the stigma that they face in Indonesia. So my question to you, in your opinion, what do you think is the most effective way for the government to address that issues, which in turn will increase the economic participation for people with disability? Thank you.
Why don't we take those three questions and then see how much more we've got.
Yep. Yes, targeting is a very difficult issue, but thanks to also DFAT support, Indonesia have this 25.4 million UDB that having like this by name and by address of like the poor. However, with the people exit and enter poverty, there is a need to continuously improve that data. The last data is in 2015, which is like 4 years ago, and then like what we need is like to further improve it. But improving it's also difficult because you have path dependencies. With this noisy democracy, it's difficult to ensure that you got also acceptance, buy-in from everyone. I think there are several ways to do that. The first one is like, especially on like looking at the bottom population, at the bottom of the poorest, our experiment with JPAL and TNP2K indicated that actually community do better in identifying the very poorest of the population. So there is a need to including the community beside the usual PMT way, but you also need to do more in terms of self-selection in and self-selection out, including like using the on-demand application system, which also based on our experiments so that it can actually improve further the UDP data. But also with the new big data and others, there is a need to marry this data with the other data, including the utilizations of like the electricity, utilizations of the SIM card, including how much that they pay, to really understand how we can address the inclusion error, for example.
Before I answer the question regarding the person with disabilities, I just want to add what Bu Vivi already mentioned. The National Team for Acceleration of Poverty Reduction, or TNP2K in Indonesia, did so many, is currently trialing so many approaches for a better targeting system. One of the particular that currently is ongoing process is BPNT. BPNT is a cashless food transfer. Even though it's not only for food, you can also buy for the LPG, paying for electricity bills, things like that. And then by having the data that they use, it's the UDB, the Unified Database. So basically, we try to improve the inclusion and exclusion errors of that one. And then again, involving the community, as Bu Vivi already mentioned. And then regarding for the person with disabilities, Law number 6, 2016 actually already consists of so many different aspects of how to make sure the inclusiveness of persons with disability in development agenda. However, currently it is only the law. We need more practical regulation like ministries regulation, things like that. And then it is not, well, the target is about 8 ministries regulation, but up to now, no ministry regulation have been implemented. And then that's what is the first particular issue. And then there are so many different things, simple things like that we need to improve. For example, in the universities across Indonesia, the structure is not really person with disabilities friendly. So those are the things that actually could be improved in Indonesia.
Paul, you want to try your hand at the political economy question?
Yeah. Thank you very much for the Facebook questions. The question was about, would investing in a new capital city displace resources from other things? And a key principle is there are trade-offs. So if money and time and effort are being committed to building a new capital city, then that money and time and effort are being displaced from other priorities, for example, health and education. And just noting, for example, on health, that Indonesia's health spending is very low compared to many other countries. I think when thinking about the capital city, one way to look at it is through the prism of choosing a no-regret option, which is an economic way of thinking about decisions in context of risk. And no one has ever regretted investing in schooling for children or in improving the health of the population. There are lots of benefits there. Whereas investing in a capital city, there can be potentially some long-run outcome from it, but there is a real chance of it not going as well as might be hoped, for example, in the Myanmar case, and for later regrets.
I sense the question was actually, why is that being prioritised over these other things when the rationality is... So it's the question of the politics, I guess, and we may want to think about that as we take some other questions. What's driving the political incentive to make that announcement over other things? Other questions? Gentleman in the middle? Someone get a... I'll take a couple more if people are indicating. There's one there, and a lady here. Okay? No.
Hello, my name is Michael. I'm a master's student in ANU. So my question is regarding the Clean Cooking Initiative. As it is evidenced in the presentation by you, there is a very high penetration of residential electricity access. So I'm just very curious, is there any policy impetus to increase the uptake of electric cooking and just leapfrogging from traditional biomass just to electric cooking and skipping the LPG, because LPG has its own challenges in supply chain and other things. So, yeah.
So I think that lady has a microphone, and we'll get a microphone to you as for... So, yep. And if that microphone could come to the front.
Thank you very much. My name is Amalia Sustikarini from University of Canterbury, New Zealand. I'm not trained as economist, but I really enjoyed the presentation, so thank you very much. My question is especially directed to Pak Martin. And well, as I'm not trained as economist, so let me move back a little bit to my political science background. As we know that one of the narration that persistently voiced by some groups in Indonesia is the economic marginalization experienced by the Muslim groups. So basically it's the identity-based marginalization and inequality. So what Jokowi, so the notion from Jokowi by stated that no one left behind is actually, it goes beyond the identity, because it's it focus on the general marginalization, electrification and disability and elderly. It all goes beyond the identity, and particularly on electrification, we know Nusa Tenggara Timur is one of the lowest province with the lowest electrification, and we know that Nusa Tenggara Timur is predominantly Catholics. So my question is probably more practical, but I think what do you think that the economists or the scholar from economic faculty in Indonesia, could campaign this, that what faced by Indonesian is actually more than just identity-based marginalization, because this marginalization is not only faced by the Muslim group, it's actually experienced by the all component Indonesia, and how to make it practical, in the campaign to all the Indonesian people. Thank you so much.
Yeah, good morning. Thank you very much, Paul, Martin, and Vivi. Very, very good presentation. My name is Johan Weintrey. I used to teach at Alatas University. Currently, I'm actually teaching in Vietnam. When we are looking at economic issues, we're talking about a budget. But what about the mentality? If you look at data from the World Bank, they actually are saying that if you want to improve someone's lot, it's not only the economic factors, but also the social factors, especially social capital. Social capital, actually, we did a survey a couple of years ago, and we discovered that actually that social capital in Indonesia is very, very low comparatively to other countries. Now, if more funding would be directed to get people working more together into providing, for instance, actually when we're talking about electricity, spreading knowledge on, let's say, solar energy or other things actually to the community in a bigger fashion. And that's not only actually about energy, but also on health. When we talk about disability, people who are suffering of a disability, very, very often actually they can be better treated actually in the community than actually getting outside help. What would be the equation if we're looking at economic ways of improving, so having a budget, also actually to improve the social attitude among people and also actually within the country? That's my question.
Who wants to start?
You want to start? I will try to respond the lady in the middle and the gentleman in front, and I believe Vivi also can chip in. Okay, actually these two questions are related. First of all, in our research, we do not see that marginalization is identity-based. Actually, as an economist, I'm rather really far from, I have close to zero knowledge on identity-based marginalization. So what we see is there is for those who live remotely or pretty far from Java, the probability that they are being neglected or left behind is getting higher and higher. And then whether it's related with their religiosity or their religion or other things or other orientation, we do not cover that one. So that's basically, and then also related with the notion of social capital. So currently, when I was part of the TNP2K, the national team to acceleration the poverty reduction. We try so many different things. And then it's not only about economic tools, but looking beyond that. We take into account the knowledge from psychology and sociology. For example, the social capital. How social capital can improve. That's why the community now get involved into the decision who gets what. So that's because of we believe that the community can play an important role. This is new for the economics. And then, well, not that really new, but it is rather new in Indonesia. That's how we look at it. But obviously, for example, in the context of elderly, for Asian people, the elders is the responsibility of their children. We do not want to against that concept, no? But we believe that there is a certain minimum amount of protection that country, that government should provide for everyone, especially for the poor and the vulnerable. I'm not saying that Indonesia should be a welfare state in one night. No, I'm just saying that, look, we only have 0.8 to 0.6 percentage of GDP that's spent for the social protection. Vietnam, Thailand, South Africa, they do much better than us. Let's just give 1%. That's it. That's what we think. So basically, what we believe is should be a certain amount of protection that the government should provide, and then that's it. And then how to provide this protection, we look at different aspects, including the social capital aspect, including the psychological aspect. Why poor household do not have enough saving? Probably they do not have enough income, but probably there are other things. They lack of ability to calculate the future. So many different things.
On the importance of social capital, I totally agree. Community needs to do more. Like a lot of the issues in Indonesia, we cannot really just rely on government to address. A lot of the issues is actually you also need demand side issues. For example, stunting in Indonesia. Stunting, you cannot really just address by providing more money, because the issues of low immunization, the issues of low breastfeedings and etc. Community will do better in terms of pushing it. Indonesia had tried a couple of a program that actually tried to do more improving social capital through community-driven development program, KDP, and then PNPM, no Dana Desa. There has been some, unfortunately, the Dana Desa, for example, it used to be more the heavy focus on building the social capital was there before. In Dana Desa, it becomes very much more deciding and the allocation of the budget. But improving social capital is a difficult one. How to do it? For example, when we try to look in terms of all the sporadic of organization at the village level, it doesn't really translate always into capacity for coordinated actions. How to do it when you have a lot of this demand from the social capital the right way, it's very difficult. We try to look in terms, for example, to what extent there is elite capture. When we use the allocations of the social assistance, it's actually involving the informal leaders will be a better one than involving the formal leaders within the village. So I think social capital is important, but how to improve it in this current situation is a difficult answer.
And on Michael's question on electric cooking, there are a small share of households. There is a small share of households using solar electric cook stoves, but it's very small. In the future, there's a lot of potential there because solar panels have got much cheaper, and batteries are also getting cheaper and better as well. So there are potentials there, but currently it's very small.
Thank you. Now, we are supposed to finish at 10 past 12, and it is 10 past 12. So in the interest of maintaining my credibility with the organisers, I'm going to stop it there. I'm going to make one observation, though. As a generalist economist who has no particular in-depth knowledge of Indonesia, I was struck by the point about stability. It's a terrific story that Indonesia has had such a stable growth performance, being such a complex, rich and dynamic society. But we've been talking about all the challenges around allocating, making sure everyone benefits as much as possible. That's much easier if you could grow a bit more. 5% seems a bit underwhelming for a country like Indonesia. So it seems to me the challenge is how do you lift that growth rate? Maintaining some stability, but trying to grow it a bit faster, which means a fair amount of structural reform that's needed to give you more pie to allocate. Then you've got all the complex issues here. Anyway, look, thank you very much. Thank you, Thomas.